Hi, welcome back to Defcon 3. We've now got Jonathan Schanzer from the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, and he's the guy, Jonathan is the guy who really, more than anybody, and the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies is the think tank more than any other. It really has been at the forefront of trying to find another option with dealing with Iran. They've led the call for sanctions. They've done all the research. They've been up to Capitol Hill, lobbying Congress. They've been extremely effective in getting biting sanctions. But we've had sanctions for years, Jonathan. What's different about the current round of sanctions?
Sure. Actually, KT, firstly for having me, and just one quick correction. FTD is not a lobby group. We obviously...
No, a think tank, right. That's true. You aren't lobbying Congress. You are definitely not lobbying. Right. You are going,
just want to make
providing
that clear
them with
for
information.
Everyone.
Exactly.
Right, right. But actually what we're seeing right now is, I would say a whole new realm of sanctions, one that we, measures that we haven't seen up until now, and I think measures that could potentially move the mullahs to do something that they haven't done before. I mean, we don't know whether that means they'll renounce the program, whether they'll go rushing toward it, but certainly we feel like this could be something that really could have an impact. And that is, we're seeing right now on Capitol Hill a move toward sanctions against the company known as SWIFT. This is a multinational collective that is responsible for the technology that allows banks around the world to settle transactions amongst themselves. So in other words, KT, if I wanted to send you $5,000, it's pretty likely that when I go to the bank to send that, it will be the technology that SWIFT provides, which is secure and encrypted. It's that technology that allows us on my side to initiate the transaction, and it's the same technology that allows you to settle it and to make sure that something's deducted from my side and added to yours. Now, SWIFT is responsible for billions and billions of dollars around the world. It is the lifeblood of the electronic global economy, and what we're talking about right now is either having SWIFT take measures on its own or even sanctioning the company and thereby cutting off the Iranians of potentially billions of dollars in electronic trade.
Well, how likely is SWIFT to do this? Have they ever done anything like this before?
They've not, and it's funny. I mean, they are sort of everybody. Very few people know even what SWIFT is. They operate very much under the radar. They're sort of quietly the global leader. There are other companies that actually do what SWIFT does, but they're the Google, if you will, of the electronic transfer world. They've not really been involved in this sort of thing in the past. I mean, a lot of people may find it even a little bit disquieting that that SWIFT would be used for political means. But I can tell you that Congress wouldn't be looking at this so seriously if it didn't feel that Iran was getting too close to that nuclear weapon, and that the sanctions that we've imposed until now, while they've been effective, they still haven't moved the mullahs to do enough to move away from that nuclear program. So in a certain extent, you could even call this the nuclear option of sanctions against this Iranian nuclear program. I mean, I can't think of much else that could happen after this, given the potential impact if SWIFT does what we hope it will.
Okay, so who lobbies SWIFT to do that? The United States, as you pointed out, wants it, but I can't believe the Iranians want it. I can't believe the Chinese want it. I can't believe the Russians want it. So
right.
How does SWIFT come to this decision, and whose beck and call are they at?
Well, they're not at anyone's beck and call. They're based out of Belgium, but they've got a number of multinational organizations, some based here, some based in Europe. I mean, they've got a very high-powered group of people that make the decisions about how their technology is used. And up until now, I don't think there's really even been a question about how that technology should be used. It's just something that is available to the entire world, and it's sort of part of the capitalist system, the electronic system that has evolved over time. But what we've pointed out, what the Wall Street Journal has pointed out, what Congress has pointed out, is that it's actually against two of the sort of governing rules that SWIFT must abide by. First of all, its own internal documents. It actually says within SWIFT's internal guidelines that they are not to be providing their services to organizations or entities that are involved in the proliferation of terrorism or the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Iran is obviously involved in both, and so just for the sake of abiding by their own bylaws, SWIFT may yet come to the conclusion that it is certainly within their right to cut off Iran from their system. Then there's also the fact that they're based out of Belgium, which means they're part of the EU, and the EU has sanctions against a number of Iranian banks and sanctions against Iran in general for its nuclear program. So based on those two things, we believe that SWIFT may come to this on its own volition, and I think actually that would really be the best case here. I don't think you want the United States dictating terms to SWIFT. I think they should come to their own conclusion based on the optics of of an institution that is relied upon by the international community. They should say, okay, we've really made the assessment here that there is risk involved to our reputation, and therefore we are going to cut maybe not even every transaction, maybe allow for certain oil transactions to go through, maybe medical or food, but in other words, cutting down on a number of the transactions that potentially threaten international security.
How swiftly could SWIFT do this?
I think they can do it relatively quickly. I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs of the technology and what it would take to sort of put filters in. But I've got to assume that they know how to do this. I'm sure they've cut other people out of the system, maybe on a case-by-case basis. But to do so, I think on the scale that we're talking about here, it's just unclear to me. We know that SWIFT right now is in talks with the U.S. government and with other governments around the world, trying to figure out how to satisfy everyone and try to find ways to ensure that the standoff with Iran ends quietly. And really, again, I think it's important to note here that we wouldn't be at this place, and SWIFT wouldn't even be having to think about this had the Iranians not, decided to double down and to push forward with this nuclear program in the way that they have. This is one of the few arrows I think that we have left in our quiver.
Okay, so let's say this happens within the next couple of days. At that point, the Iranians basically can't clear the checks. But how long does it take before the Iranian economy really collapses?
I don't know. I mean, what we're getting a sense right now is that the Iranians are already feeling the pressure. We've got measures that recently passed on the Central Bank of Iran. We've got, sanctions against people who refine Iran's oil. We've got the IRGC, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard, which controls a huge chunk of the Iranian economy. We've got sanctions against them. So the sanctions have been building, and the Iranians are certainly feeling the pain. The problem is we've just not been able to get them to say uncle yet. We've not been able to force them to come back to the table and say, okay, guys, we're going to renounce this program. And so the thinking is that perhaps yet a little bit more pressure. Actually, it's a heck of a lot more pressure. Just to give you an example, there was something like $35 billion in trade in the year 2010 between Iran and Europe alone on SWIFT. So now extrapolate that and think about what it would mean, in terms of, let's say the broader Middle East, Latin America, Russia, China, etc., the Far East. We're looking at tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars that would potentially be blocked, and the Iranians would not be able to trade in the way that they have with cash. They'd be forced into a barter system, and that system is really closing on them due to international consensus to cut down on oil. For most of Iran's oil partners, the U.S. has been working quietly behind the scenes to really reduce the number of people who are buying Iranian oil so that there are only a couple of buyers, and that those buyers can extract deep discounts, perhaps 15 or even 20% discounts, and that will absolutely shatter the Iranians and their bottom line.
So is the goal here to get Iran to a negotiating table and somehow they're going to negotiate away their nukes, or is the goal to so stress the Iranian economy that the central government really collapses, or that the protesters come back out into the streets and you see the Arab Spring people chanting in the streets of Tehran and toppling the mullahs?
I think it depends on who you talk to. I think there are a lot of people out there who would say, you know what, I'm really satisfied with the idea of Iran just simply relinquishing its nuclear program. But I got to tell you, I don't think that's enough. I think the threat here is not Iran with a nuclear weapon. It's this Iranian regime with a nuclear weapon. In other words, even if they stop.
That's what General Michael Hayden has said. It's not that we mind Iran getting nuclear weapons. It's this Iran getting nuclear weapons. And if you topple the regime, then it might be a very different story.
That's right, and the know-how for a nuke would remain. So let's say they step back from the brink, they open up their doors, they allow inspectors to come in, but 2 years from now the knowledge is still there. It will be like mowing the lawn. And to a certain extent, one could argue that that would be the case if you bombed some of the nuclear programs. If the scientists are still there, the capabilities are still there, and you still got a nuclear threat somewhere down the line.
Well, tell me, what's going on with Chinese, Iranian, U.S. relations? Where does China figure in?
Well, it's obviously very tense. The Chinese, you know, they've been blocking measures at the UN over Syria, and Syria is obviously an important player in the Iranian orbit. The Chinese are not necessarily eager to cut back on their consumption of Iranian oil, for that matter. And so one of the things that we've done to try to sort of accommodate the Chinese position is, just as I said earlier, that if you can get a number of other countries, sort of willing allies, if you will, to cut back on the consumption of Iranian oil, you know, less volume of oil imported to some of these European countries, will allow China to continue to buy oil, perhaps even at greater quantities, so you're not creating you know, problems on the oil market. You're not stretching it thin, and meanwhile the Chinese can get a better price and ultimately still hurt the Iranians in their pocketbooks. But it's not been an easy road with the Chinese. The Chinese are obviously one of the Iranians' top partners in trade, oil and otherwise, and so we've got some tension there. But then there's also the question of, you know, we're indebted to the Chinese. We're trying to reset relations with them. This has not been an easy dance here for the Treasury or for the executive.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jonathan Schanzer, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Keep up your great work.
Thanks so much, KT.
Well, this is the time at Defcon 3 where I take all the questions that our experts